matter of explanation, see, they can't see me though, 'cause it's just you two in the picture.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I'm the mysterious voice off the side. Just wanted to get together and talk a little bit about some of your histories and some of your past. Grandpa, if you'd like to start, I would appreciate that. Could you tell me a little bit about when you were born and what conditions you were born, your family, and...
Well, I was born of goodly parents, no doubt about that. I was born on the 16th day of May in 1914 in Salt Lake City, down on the west side of the city, and it was right on the corner of 9th West and 2nd North. It was a home that my dad had bought, and then he built on to it so he could care for all the kids. I had 3 brothers, no sisters. The oldest brother was Kenneth, the next to him was Wayne, then me, then my brother Cy. His name was Vern Silas, but we all called him Cy. And he's still living with his wife in Portland. And he is 3 years younger than me. When I was a boy, I had the measles, and they left me blind. And I was blind for 8 weeks. And I remember sitting in the back bedroom with bandages on my eyes and the shades, the blinds drawn down so there was no light coming in. And I remember on this Christmas Day, my dad had to get a prescription for me, and it was snowing, and the streetcars were not working at that time, so he walked from 2nd North and 9th West uptown to buy the medicine for my eyes. After I remember being administered to as a kid, and I remember when my sight was restored to normal. And it was a normal sight. I never wore glasses till after I was married to Helen.
So Grandma's the reason you have glasses?
Yeah. So I only use them today to read with, but I can see pretty well without them. Well, we grew up there till I was about 3 years old. Then Dad bought a house out on the east side of town, out in the Granite Stake in the Richards Ward. And I remember living in that home. That was on the corner of Coatesville Avenue and 8th East.
That's an interesting thing. What he didn't know was I lived on the next street. We didn't know each other because we were all so young.
I remember this home very well. It was a nice home. And my dad at the time was the salesman for the wholesale grocery house.
So you have to tell him your dad's name.
Joseph?
My dad's name was Joseph H. Lake. And Dad was, I remember some of his grocer friends in the Italian section of Salt Lake would come out to our home just to visit with Dad and his family. And I remember the one fellow always bringing us a big stock of bananas. And so we kids always looked forward for old Tony coming with his bananas. I remember as a kid living in this house that my mother sent me up to my Uncle Ed's grocery store, which is on the corner of 8th East and Downington. And she gave me a list of the groceries she wanted me to get. And she also gave me an apple to eat on my way to the store. Well, I put the apple in my pocket and went into the store and gave the list to my Uncle Ed, and he gave me the groceries, and then I went ahead and pulled my apple out and started to eat it. He thought I'd help myself to his apples. And I remember him taking the apple away from me and giving me a lecture on honesty. Well, that, of course, was hard on a little kid. And I never did quite forgive him for that, even though he was married to my mother's sister. And but he was a good man. But then after a while, the diseases started hitting this town. Measles and whooping cough and diphtheria and all these. Well, I got the whooping cough. I'd already had the measles, and then they would quarantine your house so nobody could come in and you couldn't go out, and put a sign on the thing, whooping cough. And they went ahead and took the father out of our home, and he had to live with his brother and their family to go to work, and he was gone about 6 weeks. And then he got home, and one of the other kids got the measles, and he had to go out again. And I remember that very vividly. Well, then I remember the sewer being put in down 8th East. And I remember as a little kid going out and looking down into that big trench and having a house connected to the sewer.
What would you do for a sewer line before then, though?
Oh, you had before you had the sewer, you had a cesspool there. We had indoor plumbing, but that did away with the cesspools. And some people had outhouses still along there. I remember one family had their outhouse, and the kids on Halloween would tip it over, and they'd have to go out and fix it up again. Well, talking about an outhouse, my Uncle Arthur Fruin, who was married to my dad's mother, and he was the father of Althea Fruin, who still lives in Salt Lake.
He was married to your mother's sister, honey,
And so I remember his Uncle Arthur Fruin's sister was named Dorcas. And Dorcas, I remember her very well, telling us kids about one night she had to get up and go to the bathroom, which was an outhouse. And she went out in the backyard and sat down. They had a 2-hole deal where 2 people could go in at the same time. And she went to sit down and sat on a chicken. So they come out and took refuge in the outhouse, and how she reacted to that. Well, as things went, Dad sold that house. He bought it from the Grand Richards, who later became one of the 12. They were very good friends, the Grand Richards and my dad. And Dad moved back to the west side of town on 2nd North and 7th West. I remember the address was 765 West 2nd North. And this was the home that his father and mother lived in, and where he and Uncle Jack Lake were born in that house. So we moved back into that house. And
You've got to move faster, honey. Okay.
we also went to Jackson Jackson School, which was to the rear of our lot. We could cut up through the back of the neighbors and be right at the school grounds. And I remember being in the 1st grade in the Jackson School. The teacher was a terror. Boy, she had us all scared to death. And she had a loud, shrinking voice. And she'd slap your wrist with a ruler if you needed it. And I guess she thought I needed it. And as I remember her squeaky voice. And when I got out and into the 3rd or 4th grade, still living in this same house. I had a teacher that I really loved. Her name was Miss Bowditch, and she lived out toward Bountiful, Utah, but she was nice and kind, and I learned more from her as a little kid than I ever did from anyone else. And then after Miss Bowditch, after I got out of her class, I went to another woman teacher whose name was Olson. And that she hadn't been teaching too long. She was quite an attractive girl, and she wore a long string of pearls all the time. And I remember she told me I had to stay after school. I needed discipline. And so she locked me in the room all by myself, and she left to go down to the office. But when she was gone, I opened the window on the second floor, and the drain pipe was coming down this corner of that building, and I got on that drain pipe and slid down to the ground floor and went home. So she came back, the room was still locked, but no Ralph. And so when I came to school the next day, for the reason she had made me stay after school, she was lecturing me, and I thought she was going to slap me. She raised her hand, and when I saw that, I thought I'd defend myself, and I reached up like this, and my hand grabbed hold of her pearls and broke them, and they went all over the floor. So that was the reason. So we lived in that house, and Dad still was a wholesale grocery salesman, and then he thought that he would do better if he was in business for himself. So he bought a grocery store up near the McEwen School of Music in Salt Lake. And that's just west of the Temple and Tabernacle grounds, about 3 or 4 blocks. So we kids all worked in that grocery store as kids. And that time you just had a counter, and you would go and pick out what the people wanted. They didn't help themselves in those days. And you'd go get what they wanted and bring them up to the counter, and Dad would ring it up or charge it to them. Most of the accounts were charge accounts. But we kids had to work in that store and sack potatoes and beans and keep the candy case full of different sorts of candy. And I remember the potato chips always came loose. And we had a little container where we'd put those potato chips, and they tasted so good to me all the time. And I ate all the profit on those potato chips. But I worked hard in that store, and I was up to the age now where I could ride a 2-wheel bicycle. And one of my jobs was delivering the groceries to the old widows that lived in that area who worked down at the Temple. And I'd sack these groceries into what we used to carry our newspapers in, to deliver newspapers, and throw them over each shoulder so you had 2 bags of groceries hanging down each side of you, and ride the bicycle up, and that was up by Capitol Hill and those hills up there, and we'd deliver groceries. And then we had an old Ford Model T Ford pickup with a half-a-ton bed on it, where we deliver the bigger orders, and we used that a lot on Saturday. And then they'd also pass bills out with your specials on the bills. So my younger brother Si and I had to pass those bills out in all those apartment houses on Capitol Hill and the homes. And then the people would just call in and tell you what they wanted. And so we had our share of the business also. Well, about that time I was getting up to be about 8 or 9, and I was baptized in the old 17th Ward Chapel. That was right around the corner and just a block west of the tabernacle. What are you doing?
Well, weren't you baptized in the tabernacle?
I was.
Oh, well, I'm sure I was living in the 17th Ward, but then
We were all baptized in the
you
tabernacle.
get your recommend from the bishop in your ward, then you go to the tabernacle, and then they would baptize you in that baptismal font underneath the tabernacle. And then,
Everybody in
didn't
Salt
even know-
Lake did this.
and
I didn't even know there was a baptismal font.
oh yeah, the baptismal font sat on 12 oxen,
Oh.
like they do
Down
in
in
the
the basement.
temple.
Mm.
And I remember being baptized there. And then we lived there on Almond Street in an apartment at the side and above the store. And I remember sleeping on the roof of that store. It was a flat roof. We could sleep out there and look up at the stars all the time. And then they called my dad to move back to the 16th Ward where we had lived before and be the bishop in the 16th Ward. And then they made Nicholas G. Smith the bishop of the 17th Ward on that same day. Well, Nicholas G. Smith was a good friend of Dad's, and he knew all of us kids. And when Helen and I were married, Nicholas G. Smith performed the ceremony for us in the temple, because at that time he was a sealer in the temple himself and was the acting patriarch for the church after Elder G. Smith's father died. And you know, the patriarch went from father to son. And so Eldred was not called to be the presiding patriarch,
Too
which
young.
was kind of hard on him. Thought he had been slighted. Later on, when there was a vacancy in that, they put him in. He had returned from a mission and he was more well grounded for it, and so Eldred became the presiding patriarch.
You didn't tell him what your dad nicknamed you.
When I was a kid, my dad, I was into everything. I'd go into the cupboards and throw stuff out on the floor, get the pots and pans out, and
Is that where Mackenzie gets it then?
and so then my dad gave me the nickname of Rowdy. And so I grew up, and all the kids in that end of town knew me as Rowdy Lake, not Ralph Lake, and all my brothers called me Rowdy. And they called my brother Wayne older than me because he had kind of light hair. They called him Whitey, Whitey Lake. So Whitey and Rowdy, being close to the same age, we would team together. If somebody wanted to lick me, they had to lick Whitey too, and vice versa. So if somebody
Tell him about the barn you built here.
picked on either one of us, they'd have to lick the two of us. But in the school, they had a big barn across the street from the school where a wealthier family used to use this big barn for a carriage house for their horses and their buggies, and it was just a real clean barn. And if you bumped into somebody in the hall, you wouldn't say, "I'm sorry, I didn't see you." You'd just say, "Well, I'll meet you after school." And nobody had to say where or what time. We knew that there was going to be a fight in that barn every night after school.
Epler's barn.
Didn't know who would be fighting, but usually it was Whitey and Rowdy against somebody in the school.
That's
Well,
a pretty rough area of town.
yeah, that was,
The west side.
but it was fun. We thought it was fun to fight. It wasn't something you would walk away from, and you just enjoyed it. It was all bare knuckles, and didn't frighten anybody, you know. But they were a good group of kids. But Dad was
A
bishop.
number of them ended up at the penitentiary.
Bishop of that ward for quite a number of years. And we were still running the grocery store up there. Then he had an old missionary companion by the name of Bill Crosley. And Bill had never married. He was an old bachelor, and he had been a sheep herder, living out with his sheep all his life, and he came in town and bought this grocery store on the west side, just up the street a block from us, on 6th West and West, 6th West and
Doesn't matter.
on 2nd North. So when Bill was about ready to expire, he sold that store to Dad also. So we operated the two stores. And my mother did a lot of keeping that store on the west side, my older brother Ken. And so they got up to the time when Ken should go on a mission. And he went to the German-Austrian mission with headquarters in Berlin, Leipzig, and all those cities. And we sure hated to see him go. We all loved one another as kids, and we looked forward for his letters coming home. Then when he came home, Wayne went to England, and we missed him.
He was in
Well, at
England.
this time, the church authorities wanted my dad to run for the city commissioner's job. A Catholic had that office before, an old contractor by the name of Pat Moran. And Pat, they thought, was not honest. He was embezzling funds and equipment and stuff. So Dad ran for the city commissioner on the urging of Nicholas C. Smith and some of the brother, and he was a good friend of Heber J. Grant too. And he used to play golf with Heber J. Grant. And I remember as a kid caddying for President Grant once in a while, and he would always tee his ball up on the fairway with the tee rather than playing where it laid. And I remember saying, "You can't do that, President Grant. That's against the rules." He says, "I can do anything. I'm the president of the church." I never forgot that. And so that those kind of experiences I had as a kid.
Tell about your
But my dad and mother, when I was about 8 or 9, when my birthday rolled around, they bought me a violin. Didn't ask me what I wanted. I wanted a catcher's mask and a mitt, football. But I wake up and they give me this violin. I go, oh, what am I going to do with that? Well, they enrolled me at the McEwen School of Music, and I had a teacher by the name of Miss Schreiner. She was a very good violinist and a good teacher. So she taught me how to play that violin. I could play different pieces. I was in a couple of recitals. I have a picture somewhere of me at the McEwen School of Music in one of these recitals holding my violin and looking around, you know.
I got the picture.
But I didn't want to practice. We had a parking down the street where it was grass in the middle of the street, and then traffic each side of that grass. And I'd look out the window while I was practicing, seeing all my buddies playing football. And I thought, gee, that's for me rather than here practicing. So the neighbor across the street, a kid by the name of Jimmy Ward, he came in while I was practicing. And he said to me, gee, I wish I had a violin. I said, do you really, Jimmy? He says, I sure do. I said, well, here, you made a deal. You can have this one. And I gave him my violin. Well, that night when Dad came home from work, my mother said, "Ralph, play that new piece for your dad." I says, "I can't." She says, "Sure you can. I've heard you play it." And I used to play it. Ken's girlfriend at the time, a gal named Mildred Andrus, played the piano real well. And she used to play on the piano and I'd play the violin. It didn't sound bad. But anyway, I gave this fiddle to Jim, and when Mom said, "Play that piece for your dad," I said, "I can't." She said, "Well, why not?" I says, "I don't have a violin." Mother said, "What do you mean you don't have a violin?" I said, "I gave it to Jimmy Ward." And she went and looked, and sure enough, there was no violin. So she said, "You just hike over to Jimmy's and get that violin back." And my dad spoke up and said, "Now, Mother, if he gave that violin to Jimmy, why," he says, it's Jimmy's, but he'll regret to see that day." Well, I never did, you know. And Jimmy had my violin. Well, you'd think that Jimmy went on to become a great violinist, but he did what I should have done. He went down and pawned it. So we grew up with these experiences, and then after Dad had been elected by a large majority as the city commissioner, he took over and brought the street department and public improvements was his responsibility. We didn't have a city manager and commissioners like they have here. Mm-hmm. It was a paid job.
Very good job.
It paid $300 a month, and a big Packard or a Franklin at that time was like the Pierce Arrow, whatever type of car the commissioner wanted. So I remember Dad just took the car that Moran had before him, and it was an old Packard sedan. And I was in high school at the time, and Dad would drive me to the West High School, and the seminary was just starting in those days. So we had a seminary building across the street from the high school, and you'd go there in the morning before school started. So Dad would drop me off at the seminary, and then he'd take off to go to work, and I had a membership at the Deseret Gymnasium that Dad had purchased to keep us kids out of the surplus canal swimming. And so instead of going to seminary, I'd walk up to the Deseret Gym, which is a short walk, and shoot baskets.
So just a couple blocks.
Yeah, about
east of the temple.
Yeah, it was close to the seminary, but I became pretty good at shooting baskets, and I could practice long shots and setups, and so I played in a commercial league there in the evening, and I was always the high point scorer. And so
Tell about the surplus canal, because you mentioned it.
Well, the surplus canal was out west of the Jordan River. And the Jordan River was a treacherous river because it had whirlpools in it. But the Surf didn't. But the Salt Air train, the excursion train that would go to Salt Air, the big resort, would cross over that bridge at the surface canal. So in the summer months, the kids in the neighborhood would all jump on the back end of the train as we came to 6th West in our neighborhood, because it stopped at the DNRG track, and then it'd take off, and while it was stopped, we'd get on the back of that excursion train, and we'd get all undressed, and not a stitch on when we got to the surface canal. We'd throw our clothing off on the bank, and we'd dive off the train into the surface canal. And they finally put a stop to
Did
that.
Grandma Rose know what you were doing?
No,
She
no.
hears this and she says, oh,
But
you didn't."
when we were out there, there was a lot of wild asparagus that would grow out in those fields. And then there were a lot of frogs around that water. So we'd get the frogs and get a big stack of them and take the legs off the frog and put them in a container and take them up and sell them to the rotisserie cafeteria, which is a fancy eating place.
Frog legs are
But
very,
they'd buy all the frog legs we could bring and all the asparagus we'd bring them. And so that would give us a little spending money. And so that was when Dad had been in the commission for about 3 years. He was very well thought of and well loved. And he was, they wanted him to run for the governor on the Republican ticket. And he felt obligated to fill his term to which he had been elected, because his friends had put him in there. And so he refused that nomination. And then before the election, he was operated on for appendicitis in the LAS hospital by our old family doctor, Openshaw. And as a result of that operation, he got pneumonia, and his heart wasn't strong enough to pull him through the pneumonia, and he died in the hospital. That shook us up as kids, of course, and Mom, and all the people on the west side of town.
you might
His
mention,
funeral was held in the Assembly Hall on Temple Square, and it was full. Even the balcony was full of people. And they had 12 motorcycle policemen clearing the traffic and leading the funeral procession from there to the Salt Lake Cemetery where he was buried. So that was a great shock to us.
there were a lot of people died of pneumonia.
When he died, they appointed Harold B. Lee to fill Dad's unexpired term. And that's how Harold B. Lee got into politics. And then he was re-elected. And he, knowing the family and knowing that I was getting of the age of being able to go on a mission, and Wayne the same way, he gave us jobs in the street department. And I worked on a jackhammer cutting concrete, and it was a loud, and that's where I got such a loud voice, you'd have to shout to be heard. And
You were really quiet before then?
then before I went on my mission to get a little more per hour, I worked on the garbage truck, where they'd have this thing like a bathtub on the back end of the truck, and you'd throw all the garbage and the swill into this thing, then it would be pulled up and dumped into the truck. So I worked at it as a garbage man to get more per hour to go on my mission. So then I was called on to the Northern States Mission. And we had moved from the west side of town, where Dad was bishop, out to Richards Ward again in Granite State, and I was called on my mission from the Richards Ward. And Helen and her family lived just down the street from Richards Ward, just a few houses. And so we became acquainted, and when we moved back that way. But I went into the mission home. You go in for a week or 10 days, where they'll have the different authorities come and teach you about the missionary work and the gospel. But you slept right there in the mission home. And we slept in the basement dormitory that looked out over the old LDS high school football field. The church office building is in that area now. And I remember I was out to a dance while I was in the mission home, and coming back to the
They
mission
let you do
home.
that then.
Yeah, you could go out to these
Okay.
missionary
Well, tell them
dances.
why they did this.
And,
They don't have missionary dances now, but they used to hold missionary
you used to
farewells.
hold a missionary
on Friday.
farewell for you. And
They'd have a dance, an
they'd have a
orchestra.
contribution box, and people would donate to the missionary,
Yeah.
and he would get that money. And I got, $100 and some odd dollars, and different showers that they give for you. I got a lot of, I remember Van Heusen shirts and handkerchiefs and socks, so I was well equipped
Yeah.
to go on my mission. But coming home from one of these missionary farewell dances one night, I got in front of the mission home, which was on State Street, and just a few doors up from the Eagle Gate monument at that time. And I went to go in, and the garbage cans were out in front, and on top of this one garbage can, there was a whiskey bottle. There was just a little bit of whiskey left in the bottom of the bottle. So I picked up this empty bottle, went around the back, and some of the missionaries are still awake, opened the back door for me, and I went in from the ground level right into this room. There was one missionary there that was real serious, a pious kid, preaching to everybody, and he was already asleep. So I just took this whiskey bottle and lifted up his covers and shoved the whiskey bottle in by his feet. Well, he woke up in the morning kicking that thing and saw what it was, and boy, he says, there's somebody in this room that isn't worthy to go on a mission. They've been drinking. And so he went ahead and reported it to the head of the mission home, which is Brother John Taylor, who was a son-in-law of Heber J. Grant. I knew him very well, and he knew my family. So Brother Taylor came down with it and said what had happened, and does anybody know anything about it? So I went ahead and volunteered and told him how it got there. Well, he took me in and talked to me, you know. This other kid, he thought, boy, he's not going on a mission. So he knew it was just a prank. He knew I wouldn't be drinking it. So I didn't have any trouble. I was set apart by Rufus K. Hardy, who was one of the 770s at that time. And I was called to the Northern States Mission with headquarters in Chicago. And Marion G. Romney's father was the mission president there, George S. Romney, and his wife, and he was a real stern fellow. He had been the president of Rick's College, and he made the students toe the mark, and if they didn't, they'd be out of college. And so he got, he'd always take the missionaries in his big private office around that big oak desk and interview them. And I was late getting to the mission office. When we went out, the World Fair was on in Chicago, and 2 lady missionaries were going to this mission, and 3 elders, 5 of us. So when we got into Chicago, all the missionaries going to Europe and the East States Mission would take a couple of days and lay over in Chicago and go to the World's Fair. So we didn't think anything of it. We thought, gee, that's for us too. But the 2 lady missionaries went out to the mission office, and they reported, and 3 elders that should have reported didn't. And so when we went to the World Fair for a couple of days, we went out to the mission office, and Brother Romney was irate. Boy, he took each one of us into his big office and interviewed us terribly. And he went ahead and asked me if I'd ever had relations with a girl. and about the word of wisdom and why I thought I was worthy to come on a mission. I said, well, I answered all those questions to my state president when he interviewed me to be a missionary. And my state president then was Hugh B. Brown, who later became in the first presidency and won the Quorum of 12. And I said, I answered those to his satisfaction. I said, I never have, and I felt I was worthy to be there. And so he got the other two guys in there, an Elder Fish and an Elder Larson. And he immediately interviewed them, and then he didn't take us into the mission home, which was next door to the office, where they'd usually give the missionaries dinner and then transfer them to their field of labor. So he told me, he says, you catch this train at such and such a time today, and you're going up to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And he sent Fish down to Cincinnati, Ohio, and Larson over to Iowa. The mission took in 6 states at that time. There was Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Iowa, and what was the other one?
Minnesota.
Anyway, the 6 states. And so I got the train that same afternoon, got a ticket to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I didn't get in there till after midnight. Well, when I arrived there was no missionary there to meet me. I got off the train, looked around for somebody, and nobody there, so I had the address of the mission, where the missionary stayed. I just got a taxi cab and had them take me out to this address. Well, I got there, and it was close to 1 o'clock in the morning, and I rang the bell and woke the landlady up and told her who I was, and I was to labor with Elder Gedge, who lived at this address. So she took me up, says he's in that room on the 2nd floor. So I woke him up, and he was perturbed that I would come in at that hour, and I was perturbed that he didn't come down to meet me. And so it didn't start out very well. I had nice clothes, and I dressed up as a guy when I was dating and had different outfits. I was proud of them. There was no closet in this room. You just rented the room. And you hung your clothing up on a nail in the wall. That was very upsetting to me. And so we didn't get along well. He was the district president. And the next day, instead of taking me out and tracting with me, he took off and went up to Eau Claire, up north of Fond du Lac, on what he called his country trip. And they left me at home all by myself. And he says, there's the tracks over in the corner. And he says, I'll be gone a week or 10 days. So you just go track them. Here's where the branch meets. Gave me this address in an IOF hall. And so when Sunday, I'd go to tracting, and I was really serious about it. And I tracted hard, and I'd write down there, and I'd tell them who I was, and what's your name? And I'd get their name, and I'd write it down. So I could see people on the street and call them by their name. And if they didn't answer the front door, when I'd knock, I'd go around to the back door. I was that sincere in it.
Hello?
And so
He's coming along fine, Mary.
that was
Yes,
my
it is.
introduction. So I went to the branch the first Sunday, and there was these people sitting around a pot-belly stove, and I walked in, and nobody got up to come shake my hand, and I
I'm going
said,
in on the other side.
I'm Elder Lake, I'm the labor in this branch.
Jerry,
And
just a minute.
I said, it's
Hold
time
on
to
just a minute,
start.
in the other room.
Why don't we start? And they said, well, go ahead, we're ready whenever you are. And so I had to conduct that meeting, my first day out. I had to open with prayer.
Just come across.
I had to open with prayer. I had to lead the singing and teach the class. Well, after the meeting was over, they all took off and went home. Nobody invited me to their home for dinner, and I went back to that old dingy room and baked some potatoes and had some hamburger and fixed my Sunday dinner in that room. And but I'd go tracting every day, and I worked hard, and I knew the people by name. So I was, I thought I was really blessed. So, can you turn it off now?
Oh, yeah.
Just, I don't want to do all the talking. Well, the Elder Gedge finally got home from his road trip, and well, I'd had notice from the landlady that she was selling the place and would have to find another place to live. So I went out tracting, and at the tail end of this particular day out, I was all alone. He was home, and he was working on his reports and stuff. And I met this man, an older fellow. He had this very nice home with a player piano in it and a radio and nice furniture. And in the basement, he had lots of vegetables because he had a farm up north, and he'd go up there and spend the winter. And so I said, well, what do you do with your house? And he said, I just lock it up. And I said, well, would you consider letting me and my companion live here, and we'd keep heating the place, pay the light bill and the water bill. We can't pay very much, but I told him what we were paying for our room, and he said, sure, that'd be fine. So I went home greatly encouraged.
So you had never met this guy before?
No, I never met him.
And within, what, 20 minutes of talking to him, you
You
got to where you're renting
about
his
the
house?
Book of Mormon and left him a Book of Mormon
Wow.
and had possession of his house for the winter. So when I got home, Gedge is not there. So he finally comes home and he says, well, I went out and found us a room. And he said, told me where it was and told me how much it was. And heck, that was $5 or $6 more a month than what we were paying and what I could have the house for. I was getting $20 a month from my mother for my whole, you know. So I said, well, you expect me to move over there? He says, of course. And you expect me to pay half the rent? I sure do. And I said, well, if I'm going to live over there and pay half the rent, I'm going to have half the say. I said, I'm not moving over there. I can't afford that. He says, I've already paid my deposit on it. I says, that's your tough luck. I said, you should have consulted me on it. And then I told him what I'd found. And he went over to look at it, and he couldn't believe it. He thought that was a good deal, so we moved over there. And it was there in that house. I hadn't been out quite a month yet. I went and got my tracks and was going out to go do my tracting. And he says, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to go to the post office for one place, and I'm going to track. He says, you're staying here and help me with these reports, just like that. And I says, I'm not doing that. That's your job. I'm going to make my errands. And so I walked out, walked past the front of the house, and he pulled the curtains back and walked going like this for me, and I just to him and took off. So when I got back, he says, for 2 cents, I'd punch you in the nose. And he was a big husky kid. He lived in Salt Lake out west of Redwood Road on a farm, and he was a big kid. But he had been out close to the term of his mission, and he was flabby and he was slow. And so he said for 2 cents he'd punch me in the nose. I said, would you really do that? He said, I sure would. So I went over to the dresser and picked up 2 pins and put them in my hand. I held them out like that, and I said, if you still want to do that, there's your 2 pins. He went to pick them up, and before he had hold of them, I let him have it. Boy, that was a real fight. And so finally, when it was all over, we straightened up the furniture, and he took off. And he went downtown and called the mission president in Chicago, told him what had happened. And so he came back and says, President Romney wants you to call him on the phone. So I went down and called President Romney, and he asked me about it, and I told him he said, did you actually have a fight and punch him? I said, yeah, I sure did. He said, will you pack your things and come to Chicago? I want to talk to you. So in less than a month, I was in front of that great big oak desk of his, having him counsel with me. And so I felt pretty low. And he said, I should send you home, but he says, I'm going to send you down to South Bend, Indiana, and you can work down there. And he said, it'll be 2 or 3 days before you have a companion, but he said, Elder Blatter will be your companion. And so I went down, got a place to live in South Bend, and we got it in this great big home. I had a nice room all right up, and there were a bunch of girls living there, and they were sisters, not sisters like brother and sister, but they were going out to St. Mary's, which was just adjoining Notre Dame campus, and they were going to become nuns. So I'd visit with them about the church and preach the gospel to them. And while I was waiting for Elder Blatter to come, I started tracting in South Bend. So when he arrived, to my great surprise, he was a man 65 years old. He was short and stocky and a little paunch on him, wore these long underwear down to his wrists and down to his ankles, and there I had to sleep. In those days, you just got a room and went to bed and slept in the same bed. And this old guy, he was a good old fellow, well-versed in the gospel. He had been on a mission in Germany one time and then to South Africa, so he'd had 2 missions. But he was a beet farmer up in Montana, raised beets. And Elder Ballard, when he came up to visit, he met Brother Ballard, who had just lost his wife. And he told Brother Ballard if he'd go on a mission, he'd find a wife that he could marry and be happy with. So he was looking around for this wife all the time.
It's a good reason to go on a mission.
Yeah,
Huh?
but he was good at holding the meetings and giving the talks. He could really talk. And a good old guy, but it was tough for a young kid my age to sleep with an old guy like that with that heavy underwear. And he didn't take a bath only on Saturdays, and it was tough to sleep with. And then it got worse as he started loving me during the night, you know, and thinking he had found his new wife, I guess. So that was really a rough deal. But when he arrived, we thought what we had better do is do something different to create interest in the church. And so I thought about a reading room, you know, like the Seventh-day Adventists have their reading rooms. And so I looked around the town and I found this store down in town that was vacant. I inquired how long it had been vacant. It had been vacant for a long while. So I looked up the owner on the records at the courthouse and went out to see him and introduced myself and told him who I was. And I'd like to rent your building downtown for a reading room for my church. And I said, we can't pay you very much, but we'd go in there and we'd paint and clean it all up. And if you got a tenant, then we would move on a couple of weeks' notice. And I said, it isn't much, but it'll help pay your taxes. And so he said, well, that's all right, go ahead. So Elder Blatter and I contacted a couple of the members, and we had them come in and donate a little furniture for the front part. And we had a curtain in back of that where we lived in behind there. There was a bathroom back there. And right through the alley was a YMCA where we could, I went over there and talked them into giving me a clergy membership to the Y. And I could go in and shower and clean up every day.
Yeah.
And while I was over there, I started to play handball with this fellow. And when he got around to introducing himself, he says, my name is Father Mazogopakis. And he says, I'm the priest of the Greek Orthodox Church here. And he said, you're a Mormon missionary? And I told him, yes. And so we became good friends. I went over to his Catholic service and had communion even, where he put the wafer on my tongue and gave me a little drink to go with it, representing the wine. And so we hadn't been there very long when he received an appointment to be the bishop on the island of Crete off the Greek coast. And he wrote me from New York a nice letter, said how much he enjoyed being with me, and I'd wished him good luck. And that's the last I ever saw of Father Mazogopakis. So we went ahead and had the members donate a couple of chairs that they had no use for, and a little couch, and we made a sitting room up in the front, and it had a big window platform and then this large window. So I went over to the library, over to the museum, and got them to let me borrow some of their seagulls that they had there. And then we came home and fixed a window display telling the story of the Mormon pioneers and the crickets, and these seagulls came. And we fixed up quite a display. So people shopping, we'd invite them to come in and rest and just relax and then go ahead with their shopping. And so the World Fair that we stopped to see in Chicago had this miniature temple, and it had a miniature tabernacle. And we went ahead and wrote the mission office and had them send those down. And they made a great window display of the temple and the tabernacle. And then we had this little film on the Book of Mormon. And we put a Book of Mormon and a Bible, and ran streamers to the Book of Mormon as the stick of Judah, or the Bible as the stick of Joseph, and had, they shall be one in my hand, you know. Invited people to come in and learn about this new scripture, which went hand in hand with the Bible. And so we had a lot of people come in and visit that. And we were going to give this lecture one night on Brigham Young as a colonizer. And we put it in the paper. They printed it for nothing, and I put it in the paper. What do you got to lose? Well, the time the meeting rolled around, to start the meeting, I had only a couple of people there. We had chairs set up in there, where like we did when we hold service there. And just before I was to start, 15 or 20 young men walked in and introduced themselves as students out of Notre Dame University, and they were studying Brigham Young and read where this was, so they wanted to hear about Brigham Young. So I had the opportunity to talk to all these kids, and they went away with a lot of information that they wouldn't have had for their textbooks, you see. And so that made quite a few of the friends. So they invited me and my companion to come out to Notre Dame and have dinner with them. And at that time they had 6,500 students, and they all sat down at the same time for their meals. And we sat down and had dinner out there with all these students. And then as a result of that, they talked to the coach who had succeeded Newt Rockney, and got them to give me passes to all the home Notre Dame football games. So I got to see all of those. So I also had a letter from the Sister Superior at St. Mary's of the Wasatch in Salt Lake. Dad, had, when he was commissioner, used to send his snow plows up and open those roads for her so the students could get up there. And she was a good friend, thought the world of Dad. So when she saw in the paper that I was going to the northern states, she says, if you ever get to South Bend, here's a letter for you to give to the Sister Superior there. You'll have a friend in her. So I went up to St. Mary's, took this letter, and met the Sister Superior, and she invited me to come when these girls were taking their vows as nuns and witness the marriage ceremony they go through to the Savior. And some of these girls that lived in this house where we had lived before we moved to the reading room were there to take their vows. So I've talked pretty long, and but President Romney finally died, and Brian Hinckley was appointed to fill his place as president of the Northern States Mission. Well, before Brother Romney died, he had written me a letter calling me to be the district president over in southern Illinois. And I'd only been out 6 months then. And so I didn't have any money to travel from North or South Bend over to Springfield, Illinois, where I was to meet President Hinckley and Elder Melvin J. Ballard of the 12. And so I had to hitchhike. And I just got over the Indiana line into Illinois when the sheriffs picked me up and held me for vagrancy. And they locked me up in this old jail for the night. And I got in that old jail cell, and there was one with just an old pot-belly stove for heat and just a 5-gallon can for you to urinate, go to the restroom. So these guys had been out bumming vegetables and stuff. They were cooking a mulligan stew, and they gave me one of their mulligan stews for my dinner, which I was glad to get. I had to eat it out of an old tuna fish can and use my fingers to put it into my mouth. And so when the time come to go to bed, I went ahead and climbed in the upper bunk thinking I could, and the other guys were sleeping on the floor on newspapers or on blankets they had, you know. And I got up there, and pretty soon some guy climbs up there and he's going to share that booth with me. And so I lay down, my feet down this way, and he lay down with his head down by my feet and his feet up by my head. And I slept the night there. Well, early in the morning, they came to let me out. They said, we're letting you go, but don't let us catch you hitchhiking in here again without any money. And I said, well, you'll never catch me again. But I got out onto the street, and it was still dark, and I saw a car coming, and I just put my thumb up like this and ran out in the middle of the road, and this guy stopped. I asked him if he could take me out of town. He says, well, I'm going to my ranch. It's only about 10 miles. I said, that's fine. That'd get me 10 miles closer to where I'm going. So he drove me out where he turned off. There was a big water tower there where the train would stop to take water and take out more fuel. So I saw this train was getting this water, and they were heading north. So I thought, well, I just stayed out till they finished and they took off. The train took off. I ran and jumped on the rear end of the caboose. And I was sitting out there. It was colder than heck, snow all around. And I looked in, and I could see these guys sitting around their table. They were playing pinochle or drinking coffee, you know. So I waited till the train was really reached top speed. Then I opened the door and walked in. And I says, hiya, fellas. And they looked, well, where the hell did you come from? And I told them who I was, what I was doing, and I'd been on the platform waiting for it to pick up speed so they wouldn't stop and kick me off. And I had to get to Springfield that night. They said, well, you just come on in and sit here, and when we make a stop, don't make a move, just kind of hide yourself here, and we can take you as far as Decatur, which was 50 miles from where I was going. So that tickled me to death, so I got to Decatur, and then I had to hitchhike at 50 miles to Springfield, where I was to meet President Hinckley and Brother Ballard. So I hitchhiked over there and went to this hotel where they were and told them this was morning then. So I walked in, met them, and Brother Ballard told me that he was touring the mission with President Hinckley, and they had this letter from Brother Romney calling me to be the district president. And he said, I was the district president of this same district when I was a missionary. And so he says, when I came, he said, we tried to hold a state a branch conference, and nobody would rent us a hall because we were Mormons. So he said, I went to the governor's office in the state capitol and told the governor who I was. I was a Mormon missionary. I needed to have a hall. Nobody would rent us a hall because of our religion. And he says, Governor, I think the state of Illinois owes my church a debt that they'll never fully be able to repay. But he says, you can help a lot if you could find me a meeting place. He says, well, how many do you expect to be there? And he said, I told him that we didn't know, but probably 100 people. He said, would this reception room be adequate for you? He led me into the governor's reception room, and he said that was a beautiful room. And he said, we can put some folding chairs in here for you. And he says, that's how I, when I was district president, got a place to meet from this governor.
That's a pretty bold statement to make to a
He was
governor.
Well,
just
Brother
reading that.
Ballard was a young missionary, and I read his book here just lately on it. And so anyway, he says that was one of my experiences. So they set me apart as the state president,
No,
as the district president, and then they went ahead to tour the rest of the mission. So I hadn't been district president very long when they had the state fair coming to Springfield. And in the meantime, I'd visited Abraham Lincoln's home, and read all I could about him, and I thought it'd be nice if we had a spot in the state fair where we could use that tabernacle and that temple model to fix up displays like they had at the World's Fair. And so I went to the fair board and told them who I was and what I wanted, and that we would like space in the fair. And they says, that's fine. He says, we charge so much a square foot, which would have been a couple of $100 for the week at the fair. At that time, that was a lot of money.
Mhm.
So I remembered Elder Ballard's story of getting a place to meet for his conference. So I went ahead and told him, well, we couldn't pay any money. We just thought you could donate us the space. They said, well, that would be nice, but it's just not practical. So I went ahead and told them that I thought the state of Illinois owed the church a debt which they would have a hard time ever repaying, and I referred to Governor Boggs, the exterminating order, and I laid that out to the fair board around their table. And I says it would certainly help a great deal if the people of this great state could know Mormonism in its true light, and we could present those facts to your people, which would be a blessing to them. But we don't have any money. They said, where can we reach you? And I gave them my address. And finally, I got a letter from them and told me they had granted my request and how many free tickets would I need for the missionaries to man this booth. So we set up the booth and had that fair, all because of what Brother Ballard had told me. And so we had some great experiences.
Is that Elder Ballard related to M. Russell Ballard? Or
Yeah.
Grandfather.
Well, it was his grandfather or an uncle or something.
I think it's his grandfather.
So-
But an interesting thing with regard to this fair, years and years later, out here, Delbert State, not Delbert Stately, Merrill, brother and sister Stately used to live here.
Merrill Stapley. brother and
Old
sister.
couple.
They were related distantly to Brother Stapley of the Council of the 12, and he had written to them about the church. So they investigated the church here, and I was bishop then, and we baptized the Stapleys into the church. And when she saw me, she says, I know you. I've seen you before. And she says, were you ever at the booth, the mission booth in the Northwestern States Mission? And I says, yes. She says, well, that's where I met you, and that's where we first become interested in the church. So we wrote to our nephew, Delbert Stapley of the 12, and he put us in touch with you here. So,
She remembered him from that booth.
Wow.
so I think that pretty well covers my mission. I went from the district president, I went without purse or script because I had a companion from Preston, Idaho, who had a word of wisdom problem.
This is the mailman.
Word of wisdom problem. He smoked ever since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. And he came out, and his folks were well-to-do. They raised peas over in Preston, and they were wealthy. And he came out. I met him at the train in Kokomo, Indiana, and we went out for dinner or for lunch at the cafeteria where we always ate. We'd buy a meal ticket. We'd give them $5 and we'd get in cash, and they'd give us $6 in meals on a card. So we'd do it there because it made it a little easier for us. So we ordered our lunch, and she just automatically brought us all milk, like we always had. Brought him milk. He says, I don't want this. I didn't order that. I said, what do you want? He said, I want coffee. So they brought him a cup of coffee, and nobody said anything. And he didn't feel alarmed, but after he had eaten his lunch, he pushed his chair back and reached in, got a cigarette, and put in his mouth, lit it up. Well, he was to labor with me, and I talked to him about it. I didn't read him out and read him the Rat Act, but I told him that if the mission headquarters knew that, they'd probably send him home, and you don't want to go home. And he wore Kuppenheimer suits, Florsheim shoes, nice shirts and ties, and I'd go buy my stuff at the hot shop, second hand, you know. And there was that difference. But he was a nice guy. I liked him. Well, he got to like me. And I never turned him in, but I thought, gosh, if I can help break him of this habit, it'd be a real blessing. So I decided the best way to do it was to go out in the country. It was summertime, and go without purse or script. And if I got him out there where there was no stores to disappear to and buy his cigarettes, and I asked him if he'd give me, if he wanted to quit. He did, but he said he couldn't. So he gave me all the cigarettes, and I flushed them down the toilet before we left our room. And we went out without purse or script. And boy, that was tough the first day. We'd track and all around the different places. And then at about 4 o'clock, we'd knock off to go ask for a place to stay. If they'd put us up. And the one old farmer said we could sleep in his barn in the hayloft. I said, that'd be great. So we said to him, it was still early in the afternoon, he gave us our dinner. And I said, what do you do for entertainment out here? There was no television at that time. The radios were just starting to be good. He said they listen to the radio and visit with their neighbors. I said, would you feel all right about calling your neighbors in, tell them you got a couple of Mormon elders over here who'd like to tell them about their church? Could we use your home for that? He said, sure. So he said, I don't know how I would notify them all. They're so scattered. So he gave me the bridle and the reins, and I went out and threw it on a horse, and I rode bareback on this horse around to the different farms, inviting them over there for the evening. And we had some great meetings that way. And we had some converts that summer. But Carl just was having such a time with the word of wisdom. And he didn't have any cigarettes, but he had a nicotine fit one day because he couldn't have it. And I thought he was going to die. So he just kind of passed out alongside this old dirt road. I put my briefcase under his head for a pillow and threw my raincoat over him, and I walked up and down those old country roads looking for cigarette butts. And I finally found a couple. And I brought him back and put one of them in his mouth, and he was too sick to even light it. So I lit it up for him and put it in his mouth, and I thought he'd eat it. He just went down and I thought, boy, if that has that much of a hold on a guy, he's got a real problem. So we got back into town, and Carl was transferred, and I was transferred into the mission office where I was the mission secretary. And I used to assign the mission president where he'd go to conference. I'd buy his tickets on the train, what time they'd leave and from what station. I just ran the business end of the mission. When they'd have a release for a missionary, we'd just go ahead and sign him the release and send him his check for his fare home. I handled all of that. But we had each missionary have his picture taken as he came to the office, postcard-sized picture, and we put them on a board on the wall in the mission home, and showing their pictures of when they came out, who their companions were. And then when we'd transfer them, we'd just transfer the picture from this spot to this spot. And so I got so well acquainted with President Hinckley, and I loved him. He was a great man.
And that's President Gordon B.
That's
Hinckley.
Gordon's father. I was just reading his book that he had written on Elder Melvin J. Ballard. I just finished that, and in the front of the book, he said to Elder Ralph Lake, a good missionary and a great man, with much esteem, Brian S. Hinckley, and he signed it. And I was reading it and just saw that. I hadn't seen it for years. So I labored there in the mission office and had some great experiences in Chicago. I remember one of the students at the university there in Chicago was studying medicine. His wife was ill and had to have a blood transfusion. So they called the mission office to see if anybody could give a blood transfusion. So Elder Ben Lewis, who was vice president of BYU for so many years, he worked there with me, and we went down to give this blood transfusion. And that was the time when you just lay on a table next to the applicant, and they'd just transfer the blood from your arm into their arm, and you'd lay there and watch it all. And when you'd finish, they'd give you a Coca-Cola to drink, give you some sugar, and let you go home. Well, they prick your finger to test your blood. When they pricked on Ben's finger, he passed out. So I had to give the extra amount. So I went, giving that much, I went back to the mission home, and Sister Hinckley thought I looked a little pale, and she kept giving me liver to rebuild your blood. So we got along with that. But I had great experiences there. I stayed 6 months longer than my time because the war was not on them and they didn't have the draft for all this. So then we left Chicago to go home and stopped in Detroit, bought a new car for Elder Reed. They had the Reed Luggage Company in Ogden, quite a well-to-do family. He picked up this new Plymouth in Detroit, and we drove from Detroit to Denver. And I was driving his car to spell him off in Denver, and going around the curve in the highway, the car went into a spin on the snowy roads and skidded in front of a big semi-trailer truck, and it hit our car and really mashed it in. And we had to crawl over into the back seat and go out the rear window of the car to get out before it would catch on fire or anything. So that necessitated me staying in Denver, and we just registered and got a room over there. And so my girlfriend's father, Sam Peterson, was the sales manager for the White King Soap Company, and he had controlling interest in stock in a couple of the banks out in Midvale. He was pretty well heeled, and he contacted the mission office, called the mission office, told them to put me up in the Brown Palace Hotel and send him the bill for the room and the meal. So
He wanted him for a son-in-law.
So we stayed there until we got the other car, and then drove on to Salt Lake City, and I returned home in Salt Lake at that time. So that's about all I can talk about today.
Okay.
Old mission.